All right. John, do you want to take the roll call? Or do you want me to do it?
Whatever you're comfortable with. You've got the microphone here.
All right. Dennis Gilkey. Here. Colin Hastings. Here. David McGallagher.
Here.
Fred Forbes. Fred had notified us that he was going to be a little late. He has another commitment with the fire board this afternoon. Nicole?
Here.
Tori?
Here.
And Paul are here. Okay. Now we're to public comment on agenda items, and for the public that wants to speak, we set this up as a workshop. We're still going to have public hearings. Anybody wants to speak, come up and use this microphone. Please state your name for the record. Kind of face this way because we're still keeping it on. It's being televised right now. So they'll have it for record keeping and the recording will pick it up. So anyone, if you would please state your name for the record. And John, you'll see the light up here on the podium. It'll go green. I'll give you your time. When it goes yellow, you're done. First speaker, please. Okay?
I'll speak, but before I do, so there is a 3-minute time limitation on public comment, and then just for further clarification, then this is the only part of the agenda where you have public comments. There's not a wrap-up public comment section or anything like that. Okay, so for 3 minutes.
That's great, Stuart.
I had thought that we had talked about if there was an item that we would be voting on, that we would, if it was a matter of substance, allow for public comment on that item. We talked about that at the first meeting.
And if I can... John Gucciardo, if perhaps I misunderstood, but we did modify the agenda to show public comment on agenda items at the beginning. Originally, we had just public comment in general, and I thought the discussion, again, perhaps I'm wrong, but I thought the discussion was that in order to keep the timelines workable, that you wanted to limit public comment to those items that you might be voting on that were on the agenda. That's the way I modified the agenda. If you want me to do something different, just let me know.
Well, I would suggest, my understanding of the discussion was for things like electing a vice chair or, meeting dates, things like that. For everything that we voted on, we didn't necessarily need public comment, but for some of the action items, in order for us to have discussion, for the public then to provide input, it could be much more meaningful input if the public had the benefit of our discussion before we took the vote. So I think for matters of substance, we should, at that agenda item, take public comment.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I, for one, call him hasty.
Dave Gallagher, I'll join the party wagon.
Do you want to allow more public comment? I'm sorry, I was whispering in his ear.
It doesn't, to me, it doesn't right now. And I think what we would have then when we do our next agenda, then it have things that we under an action items heading. And that kind of clarifies it if we have something that there's going to be action on. Which, as we go through and we have more and more meetings, that will develop itself just about. Because we'll know ahead of time, it'll be advertised at the next meeting as an action item, and then people can be ready to make comment on it at that time. And you don't, and I've done enough of these meetings to know sometimes, and once again, my understanding of this as a working environment, as a working group trying to come up with something, the public hearing part of it is important, but you can't turn this into a public debate or else you get nowhere fast, and we'll get nothing accomplished. So, with if you go down to each item, no, but if it comes up as an action item, if we've got it listed under an action item on our agenda, then I would be happy with it that way. I mean, I stumbled through this 14 years ago, in getting through the same process a bit, because we could set for 8-hour meetings and 10-hour meetings, and
not get places very far, and we've, quite frankly, don't have the luxury of time on our side for this. So, you know, and the bigger discussions and stuff will come when this goes to city council, because they're the one that makes the decisions, not us. You know, we're going to make a recommendation. So, you know, what our recommendation is and how well they take it or not is up to them. So, anyway, for now, unless it's an action item, and if something comes up, it's an action that's going to be of some reasonable importance, you know, we're just going to have one time today.
Okay, so I wanted to, because this relates to item 5, but then your desire is for me to just present it now and get it over with. Okay. Okay, all right, and thank you. I just wanted to establish the ground rules. Hi, Greg Stewart, Stewart & Associates. Many of you all know me. For the few that you don't, I won't get into my bona fides, but I've spent the majority of my past professional career, over 20 years, working in DRGR issues. I would consider myself one of the experts. In fact, Lee County does, because they continually hire me to provide expert planning testimony in their legal defense of DRGR-related issues, and that includes recently a $74 million lawsuit. Served on the LPA during the implementing amendments, along with subsequent amendments. Done a lot of projects in DRGR, and in fact, you all know me, I was the author of the recently completed plan. I respectfully request the committee to allow me to make a presentation sometime in the near future. I have some ideas and concepts that relate to cost-effective and environmentally effective solutions. So that is my primary request in front of you all today. I'm not sure how you handle that on an agenda item, but I would like to have the opportunity of doing a 20 to 25-minute presentation in front of the committee in the near future. Then finally, with regard to item 4, the mission statement, I think you all also need to consider in your mission statement evaluative criteria as it relates to whatever planning approach you do. I have suggested 6 planning approaches. I'll read them into the record, then I'll shut up. The first is the degree of water quality, restoration, cost effectiveness, based on proven science, engineering, and growth management strategies. Number 2 criteria will be the degree of environmental effectiveness in advancing groundwater recharge. Number 3 is whether the selected approach will be legally enforceable, very important consideration. 4, whether the selected approach will provide funding for environmental land acquisition, conservation, and long-term management. Evaluative criteria number 5 is whether the selected approach will be incentive-based or governmental regulatory type approach. And then my last evaluative criteria is whether the selected approach provides for an efficient and non-wasteful use of taxpayer dollars. Now, these are 6 good points. Again, I expect you all to, say, oh, well, that's good, that's not so good. But my critical point is that there needs to be clear evaluative criteria as you guys go forward in not only developing your mission statement, but going forward with making any type of recommendations to the City Council. And then finally, just for background, while I have time, if you could pass these out. There's been, how do I say this? Over the past year, there's been so much misinformation and confusion about so many interrelated issues. One of the things that keeps getting lost is background. What I'm just passing out is a list of what has occurred in not only the Bonita Springs DRGR immediate watershed, but the surrounding watershed. If you go through that list, and I'll just highlight a few because there's been so much work on this issue, it's important to put what you guys are doing in context. For example, major upstream projects, the Halfway Creek widening, the removal of the FP&L Bridge and the Orr Street Bridge, additional culverts, so forth and so on, vegetative removal. When you look at minor Bonita Spring projects going into page 1 and 2, work on the Letner Creek restoration, Rosemary Creek restoration. I mean, you could read it for yourself, but my point is when you go down the list of major projects and minor projects, and including approximately a section of land that's been bought and paid for by the public sector for conservation purposes, and then you look at that within the context of the ongoing district plans in terms of studying additional possibilities for wetland restorations east of Kiel Canal, and along with the other projects that relate to water quality. And these projects and plans are in the city's, on the city's water management plans. I would encourage y'all to get up to speed on that, because context and background is very important for what you're doing. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
No one? We will go down here now to, I had a request, I'm assuming you guys got the email. Oh, Fred is here. So can we go ahead and, you got here quick. You're good. Item number 3 is approval of the minutes of the meeting from January 13th. Have a motion? Second by Jen. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. All right,
There's a
John. I'm gonna-
motion by Fred and a second by Nicole for the
By
record.
Nicole. Oh, well, it's on TV, so. Oh, yeah, tried to get the audio. I'm sorry. Good. John, now, you've got some handouts and some things you want to talk about as the district gets ready to go?
I do. We'll call Phil and Dan up and let them set up for their presentation. In the meantime, I'm going to hand out 2 sets of material that they've provided for us to review with. How do you like that? New ones. Okay, thank you. In the meantime, while they're setting up, I'd like to remind any folks in the audience there should be a sign-in sheet at the back table. If you haven't signed the sign-in sheet, please do so. Another bit of housekeeping. As you can see now, we are showing this meeting live on BTV. In order so that the viewing audience has a better idea as to who is speaking and so that they can hear it, we're going to ask that the members of the group use these handheld mics so that, again, 2 reasons. 1, it should pick up the audio better. 2nd, so that people that are viewing can tell who's speaking. We have a separate handheld for our presenters.
Yeah, John, where do you want me to set up? Just wherever you're comfortable. Here, or at the podium, or? Okay.
Dave, if you want to slide around or McCullum, if you want to get over here where you can see it better, that's cool. And anyone else who wants to come over, it's easier to see the slideshow from this side.
All righty, well, I want to thank you all for inviting us down to give a presentation. You're getting the tag team from Flood and Waters here. Believe it or not, those really are our names here. I'm the intergovernmental coordinator for the Water Management District in Fort Myers, and Dan is our regulatory director. And we really wanted to kind of just kick things off by kind of giving you kind of the overview of who we are and kind of what we do. I know many of you on the task force are very familiar with what we do. Some of y'all think you have a good idea of some of the things that we do, but I just thought today I'd give you a real quick overview of who we are, what we do, what we don't do, and then let Dan talk about the regulatory aspect, which is what you guys had asked for. So the South Florida Water Management District, we're one of 5 water management districts set out throughout the state. We're legislatively established. We are the largest and the oldest. We were originally created back in the 40s in response to the state of Florida working with the federal government on a massive water resource project that stretches from Orlando all the way down through Dade County. And so we were the local sponsor of that project. We cover a 16-county area from Orlando down to the Keys. And we have almost 8 million residents out there. And our mission is all about protecting the water resources of the state. But our primary responsibilities fall upon 4 areas over here. And that's flood control, water quality, natural systems, and water supply. And I'm going to real quickly just have a couple slides on each one of those, and then we'll pass it over to Dan. First and foremost, we are set up as a flood control program, and we have one of the largest flood control systems in the world. It has nearly 2,000 miles of canals, 2,800 miles of levees. We have 69 of these massive pump stations where we can move water from one side of Dade County to the other. Principally, the canals are located from the Kissimmee area down through the Channel Lakes and the Lake Okeechobee, and then a very large system of canals along the East Coast that drain through the Everglades agricultural area down into Everglades National Park and out to the East Coast. We also have a number of canals in Collier County as well. However, here in Lee County, we manage absolutely no canals, no facilities, no structures. We are a property owner. We own several pieces of property here, and we do manage our building, I guess, that we have in Fort Myers. But in Lee County, we do not manage any of those canals or drainage features that you see out there. Those are either managed by the city or largely by the county or else by a residential community. But we do, our focus here is largely working on regional water issues. And we do work closely with local governments on trying to improve water conveyances and water quality projects. One of the more recent projects that we did, flood control related with the city, was back in 2010, where we provided some financial assistance to help with cleaning out and reconstructing several canals, or 10 different canals, about 9 miles of rehabilitation of the canals. Several of them had never been maintained. They were originally constructed. Berms were washed out. And so essentially you were putting back to what they were originally designed capacity. So we worked closely with the city on that and gave them the funding to do that, with the understanding that those are the city's canals and it's their responsibilities for maintaining them. So. And another big project that we worked on, again, as I mentioned, we focus on regional issues, not necessarily the flooding that occurs in a neighborhood or in a community. But we worked following the floods in the 1990s. We worked in conjunction with Lee County in developing the South Lee County Watershed Plan. It covered a 315-mile area, and it focused on what we can do principally on flood control issues. The recommendations that came out of it was land acquisition, primarily for water storage and flood protection, and then also enhancement and protection of the major flowways. And then they had a number of specific projects that were recommended, scattered throughout all the different watersheds throughout that 315-mile area. I'm happy to say that many of those projects have been completed. The land acquisition was largely the crew lands that were out there. Several of the flowways have been protected as a result of this plan, and some enhancements made, and numerous projects, some of which that Mr. Stewart mentioned were projects that were identified specifically in this plan that were done. In 2011, we did an update of that plan, and we did not adopt the plan in its entirety, but we did work with Lee County, and collectively we adopted the recommendations from that plan. And I gave you all the executive summary of both of these plans right here, the South Lee County Watershed Plan and then the recommendations from the plan update. The update focused largely on Halfway Creek, the south branch of the Estero River, and kind of the southern area down here around Bonita Springs. It did not go to the north. It did not go out to that far out to the east. But both of those are pretty extensive studies, have a lot of recommendations. A lot of those projects have been implemented and have been completed. But it largely took a comprehensive look at the watershed and came up with some recommendations. Another core responsibility we have is water quality. And a big part of what we do on water quality deals with Everglades National Park, with the Everglades, I should say. We're the local sponsor on behalf of the state of Florida with the federal government on Everglades restoration. And so a big piece of what we do is focused on looking at cleaning the water in the Everglades, and a lot of that money has gone towards our stormwater treatment areas. We've got built over 57,000 acres, and these are essentially marshes. If you hear local communities doing filter marshes, these are large filter marshes on 1,000-acre scales. But we also do a lot of work with local governments on water quality projects. We've provided a lot of technical and a lot of financial assistance on helping them with some of the water quality issues that they have. Specifically down here in Bonita Springs, in 2010 we funded their stormwater master plan update. The city had a plan that had been in place since 2001, but it was a bit outdated. It didn't look at some of the things that people look at these days when you're talking about stormwater. It's not just managing the water; it's about getting the water right. It's about the water quality. And so we helped the city do a plan. And it's in two phases, and if you guys haven't already looked at it, I highly encourage you to take a look at it. But it looked at the city as a whole, and the first phase looked at the flood control component, the water quantity piece of it, and came up with some recommended projects to alleviate some of the flooding and keep maintenance program in place to keep the conveyances going. And then the second component was the water quality improvements, and it came up with recommendations on how to address water quality concerns for the watershed within the city over here. And the other big part of it too was to try to help the city not only identify these things, but make sure they had all the criteria necessary so that they could pursue funding from state and federal programs. So it was a big part of this, not only identifying projects to do to address water storage and water quality, but also being able to be competitive when it came time to apply for funding. Another one of our core mission is natural resource restoration. And again, as I mentioned, a big part of us is working with Everglades restoration, but we look at everything north of the lake as well as south of the lake. So it's more than just the Everglades restoration plan. Our focus is on the water. It's all about trying to get it right, get the right quantity, the right quality at the right time, and distributed to the right locations. It's an extremely challenge, particularly given how the landscape in South Florida has been modified with all the ditches and the canals and the drainage systems that are put in place. But we have projects scattered around the agency, around the 16-county area that we're focused on. And again, principally it's Everglades National Park, or Everglades Restoration with the federal government. But here in Lee County, one of our biggest projects is the Southern Crew project. And that's located out here off of, it's the north side of Bonita Beach Road. I guess it's east of Bonita Grand. It's about a 4,000-acre restoration project. That was identified for restoration. It's largely has been ditched and drained. A lot of roads put in through there, and ditches that were constructed to kind of drain the area off. We've come through and purchased 4,000 acres, and we have a design plan in place. And the idea is to restore the hydrology out there. We're not building a reservoir out there. We're not doing a big water quality treatment project out there. This is more about trying to extend the hydro periods, trying to get the water right. Before this project occurs, you know, the water drains right into the Kiel Canal, right into the Imperial River. The idea is to capture that water on the landscape, hold it on the landscape a little bit longer. And so we have a project that's been designed. I believe it's been permitted now. It's a pretty simple plan, largely of removing those roads and filling in the ditches. And so it's largely ready to go, and we're just looking for our funding. We have not earmarked the money yet to move forward with the construction of this project. So. Yes.
So you.
Phil, is
Tory-
that map in our packet here that you handed us out?
It is not. It's in this presentation, but we can get you more details on this project too, if you like. I mean, I'm just touching upon little bits and pieces of all the things that we're involved in, and we can go into detail about any and all this meeting or future meeting. But
Right.
but yes,
Tori Polnitz, I just had a question. So if I understand what you're saying correctly, is the land has been purchased, but the roads have not been taken out, and so the actual implementing of the design of what you wanted to do out there to improve the quality and quantity issues
yes.
have not been implemented because of lack of funding, just the purchasing of the property.
Right. Some of it has been done. There have been some pieces that have been conducted already, but largely it's going to be removing the exotics and grading out the old roads and that sort of stuff.
And this should have a very positive impact on the city of Bonita Springs.
It should.
I had assumed because you had purchased it, I think many people may have assumed that you had actually been able to achieve the work that you wanted to do out there.
No, we got a long way down the road on the
Okay.
acquisition, and this is very contentious in this area over here. Some of this was taken through eminent domain.
I know, yeah.
The project boundaries were larger than this at one time, but as a result of the development, we were unable to acquire some of the properties. And in fact, these two half sections right here were originally part of the project, and they were taken out because they largely were developed before we could get around to purchasing it. But yes, correct. Right now, the water just runs down these roads and canals right into the Kiel Canal, and then out into the Imperial River. So the idea, like I said, is we're trying to slow that water down, keep it on the landscape a little bit. So
Thank you for clearing that up.
Dennis Gilkey, do you have a budget number that applies to this project?
it's about $8 million, the construction cost. So, yeah. And there will be a recreation component when the next person asks. Yes, indeed, the game plan is this over here is the crew lands, and then up to the north, and there's pockets of public lands up over scattered throughout there as well. So And then the last piece of our core mission deals with water supply, and it's all about trying to have that sustainable resource for the residents. In Florida, the water is owned by the state of Florida, the water that's navigable, that's underground, and so the Water Management District is charged with making sure that water is used wisely, and we do that primarily through two different environmental resource permit, or two different permitting programs that Dan's going to talk about. One is the environmental resource permit, which focuses on construction, and there we're looking at development that pretty much large-scale new development, new residential subdivisions, new schools, new roads, new industry or commercial activities that would come in. Those are the types of things that we're going to permit. And Dan will talk a little bit more about that, but there we're looking at stormwater, making sure that the construction is not going to have an adverse impact on the environment or the neighbors. And then we also do consumptive use permitting, and that's actually to pull water out of the ground or surface water, use it for commercial purposes, industrial purposes, public water supply, and that sort of stuff. And there's where we have two public water supplies down here in Bonita Springs that have permits through us. One is Bonita Springs Utility, and the other one is the Citrus Park. But there's a 3 billion gallon demand for water throughout our region over here, and so we largely manage that through our permitting program. And a big part of it is in terms of water supply is through our water supply plans that we do. We have these plans in place throughout the 16 county area. We recently updated the Lower West Coast planning area just in 2012. It covers Charlotte Glades, pieces of Glades, most of Henry, pretty much all of Collier, and all of Lee County. And the idea here is to take a look at a 20-year planning horizon and identify what's the demand going to be out there for commercial, for agriculture, for residential, for industry. Take a look at the users, take a look at the water supply that's out there, and on the environment was the third one. I'm sorry, I should have thrown that in there. And the idea is to try to identify, are we going to have enough water over this 20-year planning horizon to meet those demands? And then, like any good plan, comes up with the strategies to how to meet that. This plan, it gets updated every 5 years, and we just did it here just last year. The conclusions of the plan was that the demands of the region will continue to be met, provided that we take appropriate management and diversification of our water supply. And the diversification of the water supply is pretty important. Of course, this plan was for the whole planning region that covers from Glades through Collier over here, but diversification is largely such as like Bonita Springs Utility has done. They typically took their water from the lower Tamiami. When they expanded their operations, they moved down to the Floridan, which is a brackish water supply, and it requires reverse osmosis for treatment. And that's typically what we're doing at most of these locations around the district, particularly when some of the aquifers have been, I don't want to say tapped out, because they're not. Some of these aren't tapped out right now at this point, but anyway, so the idea is to try to diversify your water supply. You don't rely upon one single one. You take a look at conservation alternatives, reuse, and things along that manner. So,
Question, please.
yes, indeed.
What other diversification are you talking about other than the two aquifers?
The reuse. Take your water, recycle it, utilize it for irrigation purposes rather than pull from these sources for irrigation. Building some reservoirs, which is practice that's typically used in agricultural. Capture the runoff, reutilize that, recirculate that. Water conservation, distillation of seawater. So there's a whole suite of different
major sources of water.
I'm sorry?
So are this going to be major source of water?
Well, in this particular case here, Bonita Springs Utilities, right now they're using 58% of their demand comes from their lower Tamiami aquifer. As they grow and move forward, they're gonna limit that use, and they're gonna flip those numbers around where it'll be primarily coming from the Florida aquifer, because there's a larger source out there. There's a limited supply in all aquifers, of course, but there's a much greater capacity for development down in the Florida aquifer.
Thank you.
Based on what you just said, my understanding is that when you purify the more brackish water, that purification cost per 1,000 gallons goes up.
Mm-hmm.
So as you change that cocktail mix of how much the shallower wells are contributing versus the deeper wells, that's going to it will increase the cost per 1,000 gallons for water.
It will, yes, yeah.
right.
And typically, the cheaper waters are going to be this water that's on the surface or the lower Tamiami.
Right.
And then once you start getting into that diversification, trying to take seawater and converting that, building large-scale reservoirs and all the pumping operations and that sort of stuff, going down to the Florida is very deep and pulling that up and all that, those treatments, it becomes more expensive. It absolutely does. So historically, everybody's tapped into the cheap, easy water to get to. So.
And I had two other questions along this line. The other one is that with the shallower aquifer, if you start overusing it or you don't recharge as much as it was getting recharged, that tends to allow the water in the aquifer to the west to creep back this way. They call it intrusion or infusion.
Saltwater intrusion,
Yeah.
yes.
And that makes that shallower aquifer more brackish.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So there are limits to what you can and cannot permit.
Last question. I think at the first meeting, I made reference to that there's some kind of a study going on aquifers. I think you may have said, no, that's more central Florida. How close are we to where the areas are studied?
Well, there are a couple of different studies. There is a modeling study going on for the lower West Coast aquifers, and then the central Florida one is much further along than that, and it's actually developing a specific plan in an area where they do have some.
And the modeling study is the one that will be done in about 3 years, roughly?
Brad, do you know when the, there you are. When that model study for the lower West Coast is going to be done?
Wait, you got to come up and get a microphone.
Just tell me and I'll read it.
I ran to do it live.
I don't know what the time frame is.
Okay.
Now they're working on the layers of the model.
Okay.
Could we find out by the next
Sure,
meeting?
absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely, yep. I'll see if I can't get a summary of that as well, so. And then also, Bonita Springs Utilities, they take advantage of reuse water, reclaimed water, and so 99% of theirs is being utilized, so. Oh, and with that, I didn't realize I'll pass it over to Mr. Waters here.
I'm just going to stay here if that's all right with everybody and stay out of the way. Dan Waters with the Water Management District. In trying to put this together, struggled with how in-depth and into the weeds to get versus how much to just provide an overview and some basics on water management system designs. And also tried to look at this and think about the decisions and the recommendations that you all are going to have to make, how to try and tailor that, the information I give you into what your task is going forward. So hopefully I'm going to provide a good level of detail for you to be able to move forward. If there's more specific questions, by all means, send them my way. As Phil mentioned, he talked a fair bit about the consumptive use permitting process. With the Water Management District, we primarily issue two types of permits. One is consumptive use permits. That's the use of groundwater. I'm going to talk in a little more depth about the environmental resource permitting program. That is the permitting program that looks at stormwater management facilities for new developments. And so what that really comes down to when you're talking about the water management systems, a couple aspects. One being water quantity or flood protection, both for whatever is proposed to be developed, but then also flood protection to make sure that a proposed activity doesn't cause adverse flooding to downstream properties. We'll talk also about water quality criteria and the impaired waters rulemaking that we're currently engaged in. And then perhaps most importantly, how how some of our criteria gets applied, and then how we would integrate whatever recommendations you all as a group and the City Council may come up with into our permitting process. So a quick overview of the ERP program. Again, that stands for Environmental Resource Permit. It's required for any new development or proposed construction activities. ERPs are issued both by the water management districts and by the Department of Environmental Protection. We have a delegation agreement between both groups where the Water Management District here locally does the kind of things that you may see in the DRGR area if the land use is changed. So you're looking at master plan residential areas, master plan commercial areas, and roadways. Department of Environmental Protection does permitting for single-family home sites. Those would be single-family home sites that are not part of a master plan development, so not something in the Brooks or Bonita Bay or something like that. Ports, power plants, wastewater treatment plants. So what goes into the review of these permit applications? Again, we look at water quality impacts. We look at impacts to flood stages. Both is the proposed development going to be protected from flooding? And then in addition to that, are there going to be adverse impacts to somebody downstream? And then also environmental impacts. So before I jump into the specifics, real quickly, just want to describe some of the typical water management facilities that you might see and talk about what their intent is, what the purpose of them is, so that we're all kind of at least a base level of knowledge. The first one is what you may see in a shopping center, at a golf course clubhouse, schools, called dry retention, dry detention areas. They're areas this time of the year, they're going to be dry. They don't have water in them. They'll fill up after a rain event, either by overland flow or by water getting piped to them. And then either if it's a dry retention area, retention indicates water percolates into the ground. If it's a dry detention area, that indicates that the water is held in there and through some control structure is discharged downstream at a restricted rate. So the flip side of that is, I think, what everybody would be familiar with, what is called a wet detention area. It's the kind of things you see in golf courses and residential communities. People call them ponds and lakes. That's generally an excavated area that all year long holds water. Again, similar type thought. Water's routed to it after a storm. It fills up. In this case, it's detention. It doesn't take any credit for percolating water into the ground. Everything that gets discharged from it is through a weir in a control structure. So the main function of these systems is they do two things on a very broad spectrum of need. They're doing water quality treatment, so removing pollutants. They're also doing flood control. So in our area, we get about 53 inches of rain annually. When we're looking at the performance of a system from the water quality perspective, we're looking at a series of very frequent events. The next slide will show here in the Fort Myers area, about 87% of the rainfall events we get over the course of a year are less than 1 inch. Those are water quality events where we're concerned with pollutants coming off lawns, off of paved areas, and how well can those facilities that I showed you before remove those pollutants before discharge to downstream areas happens. Flood control, you're talking about rare events, infrequent events. And depending on what you're protecting for, those things are, you're looking at a return period and how frequently you can anticipate a particular storm, but on the order of something that may come to us once every 5 years, once every 25 years, once every 100 years. And so this is what I talked about a minute ago, just showing that here in the Fort Myers area, the third bar from the left there, about 87% of our rain events through the course of the year of that 53 inches are less than 1 inch. Somewhere about less than 75% of them are less than a half inch. So the vast majority are water quality events. And so with that, what are the design criteria that we would look at for water quality? And I can, for the DRGR area, which is obviously what everybody is focused on, if, God help me, I walk back and on my desk today there was an application for somebody to develop something in there in advance of your work getting done. Because that land would be within the Imperial River watershed, which I think everybody knows the Imperial River watershed has been identified as impaired by FDEP, there's additional design criteria that we would require as part of that permit application and that water management system. One of the things we would do is require that an applicant provide to us a pre versus post-development pollutant loading analysis. Specifically, the Imperial River has been identified as impaired for nitrogen, so we would want an analysis that looks at, and I'll go in a little more detail here in a second, but nitrogen and phosphorus, what amount of pollution comes off a site in the existing condition, what amount of pollution we could anticipate would come off a developed site, and then what efficiency the proposed water management system would have the ability to remove those pollutants with, so we can have a reasonable assurance that a proposed development or a proposed water management system is not going to cause adverse water quality impacts. We would also ask for an additional 50% water quality treatment volume above and beyond what's required in our rules, and then also incorporate into our, if it met all the other criteria that we have, incorporate into the permit that we ultimately issue construction and operation phase stormwater plans that would identify, and I'm not, when I say stormwater plans, I don't mean a construction drawing. It's more, how somebody is going to operate the system and ensure that we don't end up with pollution from it, both during the construction phase and during the operation phase.
Just a quick question before you go from that slide. So essentially you're saying that the new project would have to demonstrate that there's a net benefit in order for the permit to be issued, but you're not saying that you would require that development to reduce their pollutant load by the 25% that the city is going to be required to reduce in the Imperial River watershed. You don't do that.
Correct, yeah. The state statute, which is what we would follow in the review of our permit applications, just says that for us, for a project that's located within an impaired watershed, for us to be able to issue the permit, it has to demonstrate that it's not going to cause or contribute to the impairment. Now, what I would say to that is, if there is a standard that you all adopted, we would advise people when they came in to do a pre-application meeting with us, say, look, you're going to have to do this for the city of Bonita Springs anyway, so you may as well incorporate it into our review rather than doing it one way and having to come back later.
So that is, getting to that 25% reduction, that is going to be ultimately the city's responsibility to make sure that that's done, because just going through your ERP process won't do that.
Correct, yeah, the city is the permittee on the MS4 permit, and they're going to be the one required to meet that, yes.
Yeah, Fred Forbes, a couple questions on that point that Nicole brought up. Are there other cities that you work with now in the water management district that do have local standards?
Yeah, it kind of runs the gamut. For instance, within our basically our rule book, our basis of review or applicant's handbook, it requires that roadways be set at the 5-year one-day storm event. So in this area, and there'll be more specifics on this later, but that those things would be at an elevation that they would not go underwater except for after a storm event that, say, 5 inches in 24 hours. Right. Collier County, for instance, has a standard in their land development code that sets minimum required roadway at a higher storm event, at the 25-year 3-day event. So if somebody comes in to permit with us and they say, hey, Dan, here's all our information, we want a permit, we're going to put our roads down here, we would say to them, well, look, you're in Collier County. Collier County has a different requirement. You may as well just put it up at where their requirement is so you don't have to come back to us later. And so that's an example.
Last question for the moment. When you had the graph and the different storms and all that, the 95 and the 2005 storm, what year storm would those have been?
The 95 storm was a 100-year storm. I think that was somewhere in the neighborhood of, it varies a little bit depending on where you are, but I think that was in the neighborhood of about 15 inches in 2 days. So that was a a very severe storm event.
Tori Polonitz, I have a question also.
About the 2005?
You know, 2005, I don't know offhand. The reason, and we could find that out for you, it's easy enough. The reason I know the 95 storm event offhand is in many cases when you're designing these systems, that's the benchmark that folks use to say, okay, here's where I think the water elevation would be where I discharge in the most severe storm that, that I would be designing for or that I could foresee.
Tori Polonitz, I have a question, and you may not be able to, it might not fall in your jurisdiction as you were saying, but the use of the word development and your overview here is generally in a new planned community, a large development, versus what is already plotted out there and permitted out there, or people have, can build their one house per 10 or whatever. If I'm understanding you correctly, that these decisions that they come to you for would not, in fact, be under your jurisdiction at all if I just wanted to put one house on my 10 acres or one on my 5. And the reason I bring that up is because whether the word development means to the general public and to us as being a new major development or the development that is already in the process of being, done now just by people's private property.
Yeah. That's correct. We have a delegation agreement between ourselves and Department of Environmental Protection. So when I say a residential master plan development, something that we would look at, I think the number is something with more than, that's master plan with more than 4 or 6 units planned in one cluster. So if it's, what you have out there now, which is just, already platted lots, we would not come in and review every time somebody's going to
So that would be up to the EPA and the city then?
The DEP.
The DEP
yes.
and the city, if those, and the city has the, okay, that clarifies that, thank you.
Real quick, back to the water quality. The 2011 update for the city's stormwater plan that had different treatment, filter marshers and things, and some of them are still, of course, not implemented. Is the effectiveness of that cover the existing development? I mean, retrofit, as far as how effective is that to comply with the impaired water requirements?
That I don't know. Do you know that, John? Or Audrey?
I think that was the intent, was to address the TMDL.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, the question was the projects and things identified in the city's 2011 update to the stormwater plan. It identified filter marshes and other projects that were going to have some assumed pollutant removal efficiency associated with them. Question was, is that for existing development or is that in anticipation of future development that may come online? I assume it's for existing development and to meet that nutrient load reduction for the existing.
I don't think it was for new development. My question was really more the effectiveness of that in meeting the impaired water for the existing, really. It wasn't about future.
You're talking about the 2011 amendment to the comprehensive plan as opposed to the
No,
one we
the
did
stormwater master plan.
The stormwater master plan. I thought that I think the person who could answer that question better would probably be our Public Works Director. Am I not being picked up?
You may or may not, I'm not sure.
Okay. Is our Public Works Director, because he was very much involved with both the district and the funding by the district and the changes to the stormwater master plan involved in that. But I'm not sure because I know there's new projects, and I don't know if I would say that related to new development, old development, carbon loading. I think there's always a goal to try to continuously reduce your carbon. Does that make sense? But Matt would be the one who has the actual details to that specific.
From the executive summary, Phase 2 of the study addresses the water quality concerns in the basin encompassing the city, particularly the total maximum daily load for total nitrogen for the freshwater section of the Imperial River. So it was looking at,
And that's, I was,
Well, the reason I asked that is, of course, those basins that are included, shown on that map as number 2 and 6 and 5, do flow into some of those treatment mechanisms that are proposed, and I don't think they're built yet, some of them.
And I'm going back from memory, so that could be sketchy at best. But with what Phil got up and said, that is exactly how I remember it back when we started to do it in 2002, as I remember, 2001, to encompass of what the build-out could potentially be, and to try and head that off, understanding at that time that those studies are a living, breathing organism that are going to be changed as time goes on, because you find out more information as those change. Water is one of those things that has its own living, breathing self that does what it wants to do. And you know, the effects of it that we have, and as I remember, that was what part of what that encompassed at that time, is what we were trying to achieve, knowing that it would be reviewed, you know, every 5 or 10 years, as we always do, to update things.
So then, the city at this time has planned and is comfortable for the present density, which is permitted in the DRGR.
I don't know if I would say that.
Yes, and one of the things that we've suggested to the group is that at some point, obviously, whenever the group thinks it's appropriate, we'd like to have the folks from Public Works come in and give you an update on where they stand with the TMDL approach, where the studies are, and what projects are where on the timeline.
Okay. Well, and some of that, I think what folks are alluding to, or we're getting at, plays into this. I know you can't read this, and we've left a PowerPoint copy here. I apologize for not getting it to you sooner. We're scrambling to get this put together this morning. But what this shows you are what we call event mean concentration values for different land use types. So it goes, runs the gamut from the concentration of pollution that you'd see running off an undeveloped or forested system, certain other concentrations of pollutants associated with agricultural, highway, different types of commercial. And so when we're doing that evaluation, when something comes in, to look at what is the effect of that proposed development or proposed water management system and land use on water quality, these are the things that factor into that analysis. If you're looking at a pre versus post, what you have to look at is what is the existing condition land use, what is the proposed condition land use, how much impervious surface is a proposed use going to have, how much does an existing use have, how is that impervious surface configured. If it's a high intensity shopping center where everything goes to a drain and that goes directly to a lake, that's going to have, for that unit area, one amount of pollution that gets to the lake that the lake has to remove, as compared to a lower intensity commercial area where runoff may go over grassed areas, impervious areas, and for those smaller storm events may have the ability to infiltrate into the ground prior to getting to the water management system. And then finally, you have to look at those, the schematics I showed earlier of the treatment facilities. They all have different pollutant removal efficiencies associated with them. So you have to look at all of these things together, what the pre-development land use is, what treatment facilities are present, what the post-development land use is, how the impervious pre and post is configured, and then the proposed treatment facilities, what type of pollutant removal can you expect from them to know where you're going to end up.
And just one question to follow on that, and you might be addressing it later, but how does the soil types play into this? Because, depending on if it's a hydric soil or non-hydric soil, that's going to play into, what kind of BMPs are going to work and how all of this functions. So
Yeah,
is that something that you're going to be addressing at some point?
I wasn't going to go into that in specific, but it absolutely is a factor. This type of system here, which is this specifically is a dry retention, where you see the runoff, and typically something like this, it's not a simple thing, but typically something like this would be sized for that 1 inch, half-inch storm. It depends on what your pre-development land use type is. But if you have good soils, you can perk that runoff into the ground and it never makes its way downstream. If you're trying to do it down here 6 inches above the water table where you don't have good soils, you really don't have the ability for that to perk into the ground and have that volume recovered in advance of the next storm. So yeah, it all factors into the review that we do.
Fred Forbes, 2 questions. How long does it take you all to change a standard such as what we're talking about on pollution and reduction of pollution?
Well,
from start to finish.
I don't know what, our rules are written such that the state law basically says we cannot issue a permit for an activity if it's going to cause or contribute to an impairment.
Right.
So that is what the standard is. If you're going to change that standard, there's a formal rulemaking process that you have to go through. I think
that's what I'm asking.
And what I was getting at is if you guys have a different standard, like the analogy of Collier County with saying, hey, the roads have to be higher, we wouldn't change our standard. What we would do is if somebody came in and said, hey, I want to apply for a permit within this geographic boundary to do this, we would say, okay, but you better follow Bonita Springs standard because otherwise our permit's not going to do you any good.
Is there within the water management district any areas where a municipality or even a county designates an area and says in there these standards will even apply if you're only going to build one house on a 10-acre lot or 5-acre lot?
Well, in the case of one house on a 5 or 10-acre lot, we wouldn't review that.
I understand that, but is there other? Do you know of cities or counties that designate areas where they actually get into that type of review, even on that small project?
I think they do.
Okay.
City of Naples.
You've done big by what you just said. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to now move into moving off water quality, move into the water quantity world. And so talking water quantity, we're talking flood control. So again, if somebody is going to come in and request a permit to construct a water management system, they have to demonstrate that the on-site development's not going to flood and that they're not going to cause adverse impacts to somebody off-site. This is the other end of the spectrum. Rather than looking at an annual series of half-inch and 1-inch storms and what their impact is, again, we're looking at these storms with a probability of happening once every 5 years, once every 25 years, once every 100 years. And the things that we look at are how much discharge from that stormwater management system is going to go to off-site areas. Specifically, we'll look at that for the 25-year storm and verify that it's not going to cause flooding to somebody downstream because that development within those wet detention and dry areas is holding enough water back. We'll look at minimum road elevations, making sure that the on-site facilities are elevated so that per our standards they're above the 5-year one-day storm. Also look and make sure that houses and buildings are up high enough that they're not going to flood in a specific storm event. We've been through this to a degree, so the minimum road is the 5-year storm, 5.5 inches in 24 hours. And you can see the other ones here, the 25-year 3-day, 11 inches in 72 hours, and then the 100-year event, which is what the 95 storm was, Tropical Storm Jerry, I think it was, about 15 inches in 3 days. So just 30 seconds on how the water quantity criteria are typically accomplished. Generally, you have those facilities we showed earlier, and they are sized to hold a certain amount of water on site. They can be wet detention, what people call ponds, dry detention or retention. They are fitted with control structures to limit discharge from those control structures to downstream areas to a specified rate. And this, again, is similar to what we spoke about before. In Collier County and in Lee County, they have stormwater master plans that say, all right, if you're within this watershed, this basin, limit your post-development discharge to this rate, and that's what we hold folks to. So with that, just a couple of other real brief things. I don't know whether everybody's familiar with our e-permitting website or portal. I know at the first meeting there was discussion of, hey, we'd like to be aware of some of the things that are going on. Everything that comes into our office, both things we issue and information that is submitted by an applicant, is posted on our website. In addition to that, we've got, this shows downtown Fort Myers, but on our website through Google Earth, you can go to a particular location and look for not just the environmental resource permits, which deal with wetland impacts and flood control and water quality. We also have the water use permits on there, and so you can search for anything that you might be looking for. So with that, Phil and I are available for any questions. I appreciate your time.
Tori Polanitz, one of the questions that I have is that it seems with the Southwest Florida Water Management District that you often achieve your goals or have achieved your goals by purchasing the land, particularly we talk a lot about restoration. As far as the restoration, do you have any other areas that you could talk to us a little bit about that have taken so many individual private lands and then been able to achieve some restoration in a planned design when we're not just building a whole new community or acquiring it as public land, or I guess you're not really public land, but is my question?
I think so. Picayune Strand is a great project right there. It's down here in Naples in Collier County. Came in, I don't know how many thousands of individual lots that were purchased, and it's kind of a similar type project. It's got pumps included with it, but it's an environmental restoration project as part of Everglades restoration.
But I don't mean buying all these individual East Bonita property owners out of their land, because that, I could be wrong, but that would lead us to willing seller or a possible eminent domain situation like you all had 10 years ago. So it's more a question of what are the possibilities of doing it with people. See, I can see if you're going to do a development of some size, being able to say, well, here's your golf course in here, like we did happened in the Brooks. But if you're dealing with all these small places and the people are still going to retain their property, how much do you have experience with this? I mean,
well, in the case of the Brooks, that was a project that was coming in for permit about the time when the South Lee County watershed study was being developed, and so we worked cooperatively with them to try to incorporate some of those plans. Not a large scale.
Yeah, it's just Jack Black and Joe Flood and Sam, and each one wants to build their house on there. That's what's out there now within the city. So that's what I'm saying. Is there any place you've done this or had that input with?
Well,
without buying it.
Certainly, yeah. And Dan works with applicants all the time on projects. We'll have people come in and say, we need more treatment, more storage, that sort of thing. And we can't always force them to because our permit rules don't require it. But they definitely talk about this is what the community wants to see. This can help out. We sat down with Bonita Springs just a couple of weeks ago talking about their stormwater improvements that they're looking at doing downtown, and looking at ways that we can accomplish what they want in terms of the development side of things, but also try to help to meet some of the water storage and water treatment and everything. So those discussions occur all the time. We can't always force people to do that, but when we have plans adopted like the South Lee County watershed study, it identified specific projects in there. It didn't say who's going to pay for them. You know, but there are projects that were identified in there that to be done. DOT has stepped up, and they're actually funding a couple of the projects that were listed in the South Lee County Watershed Plan Update in conjunction with some of their projects that they're doing. And so we do work, you know, with folks, but, you know, we can't always force them to do, you know.
Yeah, if I could, real quick, I would like to introduce Rick Barber, who is on the board of directors of the Water Management District, and with him, with Brenda Brooks, who's here with him from Crew. Rick?
Hi, I'd just like, while the Water Management District family is here today, that Brenda talk about Crew for just a few minutes. I didn't ask her to be prepared to do anything as usual, but we've got anywhere from 45,000 acres of land that Crew owns through the Water Management District in the watershed just east of Bonita Springs. In that 315 square mile watershed, there's about 45,000 or so acres of Crew lands. There's actually 65,000 acres that are set aside out there in different forms, Audubon and Collier Preservation and that sort of thing. So there is quite a bit of land that serves as storage area and cleansing area out there. But Brenda, do you want to? She lives and breathes Crew. She's out there every day. I'll let you talk.
Yeah, as Mr. Barber said, I didn't know I was going to speak, but my name is Brenda Brooks. I am the Executive Director of Crew Land and Water Trust. We work very closely with the South Florida Water Management District, who is the lead agency on this program. Is this okay? Who is the lead agency on this program. But for 25 years, we've been very supportive. We have been the liaison to bring a lot of folks together with this public-private partnership. As you can imagine, and I was on the phone with someone last week, we sent out some letters on behalf of the 2020 Willing Seller Program, just to let them know that Lee County does offer this. And sometimes they don't want to talk to government, imagine that. But they will come and talk to a nonprofit. And oftentimes we're the liaison that keeps bringing people together. So we, as Mr. Barber said, about 45,000 acres have been acquired out of the 60,000 acres. Just coming on board, if it hasn't been already, it'll be another 633 acres. So there's constantly work being done to acquire that. The Crew Trust does a lot of environmental education and public outreach. And you know, you can talk to so many people about Crew, and they don't know if it's a restaurant up in Bell Tower, or if it's a store where you buy clothing, but so many people they just don't even understand Crew. They don't understand a watershed, aquifers. So what we really try to do is, of course, you folks in this room understand this terminology, but this is terminology that a lot of the general public doesn't understand, so we constantly try to educate them and just to explain the value and the importance of water. So when these issues come up, the DRGR, that terminology isn't brand new to them. It's something that they've been introduced to it through maybe a hike in the woods at Crew, and these lands that are being set aside mostly by tax ad valorem dollars to their benefit in the long run. They don't often make that connection, but over time I see that it's slowly happening. I don't know what else you want me to cover, but I'll be here if you have any questions. The boundary? The boundary, wow, that's just a small portion, but Crew does span Lee and Collier County. The boundary, you know, the very center section is where we hope to, well, it's not that we hope to, we will open our fourth trailhead off of Bonita Beach Road, and that's the area that you're seeing in the southern Crew. So the northern boundary would be Corkscrew Road, southern boundary would be Immokalee Road.
It's a big area. Everybody's walked around out there and walked the trails that they have, and then go down to the south. I've turkey hunted down in the south portion that is a private-public partnership. Is a huge tract of land, and that's one of those instances where the public has worked with Crew, work with the Water Management District in order to make that happen, and it is an enormous piece of land down there to walk around on foot, I can tell you. All right, Dennis?
Just real quick, maybe a follow-up from what maybe Tori was getting at, was the 10-acre, just say that you had several hundred 10-acre tracts. I think she was saying, and you know, an example where there's been a master plan for that's worked for something like that. But I think the other the question that maybe to follow up with that was on those tracks, you don't regulate either water supply or the septic tanks. Is that correct?
That's correct, we don't.
Another question, or just if you could explain a little bit about how Lake Trafford and the flow from Lake Trafford fits into this East Bonita picture and the flooding, and how Southern Crew hopefully will help with some of the capacity of that overland flow, and how all that fits together, because I think people misunderstand that there's this whole sheet flow of water coming from the north, but really a lot of those extreme flood conditions are coming from Lake Trafford. And with that being the case, are there additional opportunities, should there be, for some additional storage and hydrologic restoration in East Bonita, because that water's coming regardless?
Rick, do you want to take this? You've got the background on the... Oh.
Rick Barber, Water Management District. Yeah, I participated in the South Lee County Watershed Study originally, and Archie Grant with Johnson Engineering was the lead on it, and he continued to be surprised by how much water was actually flowing into Bonita Springs. The fire department went out and did measurements, so we had calibration of a model later on. But we did find that there were blockages in an area called Camp Keys Strand, which is the southern outfall of Lake Trafford. So most of the water came to the west from Lake Trafford into Bonita Springs. And you know, it's correct to say that the storage out there is being utilized now, and it makes a difference in the water quality. Part of the water quality problem and part of the TMDL problem that Bonita faces is the size of the watershed and the fact that ag north and, well, primarily to the north of that large watershed contributes to the nutrient load that ends up in the Imperial River. It's very difficult to get a handle on that. They have different rules than the Water Management District employs for residential development. They're under DACS, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Affairs. So if they meet BMPs, a list of BMPs, they're seem to be in compliance. And but we do know that a lot of the nutrient load that comes down into Bonita comes from that fact.
So the city of Bonita Springs needs to clean up the water that comes to us, and we're hoping to achieve that within the present boundaries of the DRGR of Bonita Springs. Is that correct? That if the river's impaired and all this needs to be cleaned up by the state statute, then that cleaning, if it doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of Crew, then what still comes into the DRGR means that DRGR section of Bonita Springs needs to treat the water before it gets into the rest of Bonita Springs or into the Imperial River or the Gulf.
I think what you're saying, Tori, is generally true for all of Bonita Springs, not just the DRGR, that the city is responsible, excuse me, to make sure that the water leaving the city boundaries is cleaner than what came in throughout the city.
Two questions relating to what Tori and John have said. Number one, and I'm looking for the Water Management District to talk about this, but I know in a number of the public workshops leading up to the completion submission of the Bracco report, that there were a number of people that sat in this room. They may have been wrong, but there seemed to be a lot of people that felt that when Worthington, then Palmyra, and now then Village Walk, and then those developments changed the flow, the drainage flow, to where it actually went a lot more to the south, and now it doesn't go that way because of those. Is there any validity to those claims? I don't know. I'm asking you all.
What happened was those developments were changed from agricultural developments to residential developments, but the ag used to pump water over the side of their berm, and it ended up going south into the Cocohatchee watershed. A flowway was proposed for, I guess, what's Island Walk now, or Island Walk, that Village Walk, that was originally permitted by the Bonita Bay Group, and we had a flowway in it that went south, but it was not permitted by the Army Corps of Engineers because they felt there wasn't enough data to support it. Right now, that water still, the water that comes down from the east, is still able to go south into the Cocohatchee, but the water that originally was flowing from the ag areas now goes into the Imperial River instead of south.
One last question. Edison Farm, which sits immediately on our northern corporation limit of our city, I know that they have at times, and may right now, be considering or even talking to the city about annexation. What effect does that land have on our DRGR? And if it were to be developed, would it make things better for us, worse for it, no change, or what?
Well, I guess there's a lot of hypotheticals in there, but
And yes or no?
The district, we don't make the land use decision. That's up to the local government. So they're going to, local government's going to be the one that's going to dictate whether that stays agriculture, whether it's industrial or shopping center, residential or what. So I mean, until you see some proposal, something coming through, and it's hard to say, what's going to be done over there. Those subdivisions down there, the Island Walk in Worthington, those all came in for permits, through the Water Management District, and so they had to meet our rules. That was before DEP established the TMDL, which would have required additional treatment, but those all had to meet our rules, and as part of that permitting process, their engineers sat down with our staff and talked about opportunities for conveyances for additional quality and treatment, that sort of stuff, and they by their rules they have to meet our rule in order to get a permit. There's nothing that prevents them from going above and beyond, but we can't issue a permit unless it meets those rules. But frankly, somebody challenges it, we're gonna have to be in court defending it. So, but I don't know if that necessarily helped you. But one thing I did want to say is TMDLs, because there was some question about TMDLs. That's something that's established by the Department of Environmental Protection. There's a lot of moving parts in water storage, water treatment, water supply. There's lots of agencies, as you're hearing, and the TMDL is set as a result of an impairment being identified, and so then the Department of Environmental Protection sets this total maximum daily load and says you're exceeding it. And then the next step is to develop a BMAP, a Basin Management Action Plan, that allocates who's responsible. Is it ag? Is it the city? Is it a commercial development? And based upon the information that they have, they then apportion out responsibilities for meeting that, reducing the total maximum daily load, meeting that level over there. They put one in place. They adopted a plan last year, and I think next week or the week after, DEP is going to be having their first annual update report to talk about where the cities and the counties and the agriculture community, anybody who's got a BMAP in place. And so part of that process is to go back and revisit everything and make sure that they got the allocations right. So I know there's been some concern about, ag is causing the pollution, the city has to clean that up. So That's not one that we as a water management district are involved in. We're on the periphery of it and everything, but DEP will be having their annual meeting coming up here. I think it's next week, and I can get that date. It's this week, that's right. We are next week already, yeah, okay.
It was my understanding that the development to the east of Village Walk, it used to be called Bonita Beach Road, RPD, that there are some flowways that were initially anticipated through there to kind of provide some relievers and connections. Are those still in there? Are they?
No, my understanding of that is that is not still in there. I don't think the Corps approved that.
It's not a core issue, it's a local issue.
Oh, okay.
And I'll have John Dolmer answer rather than me.
Hello, John Dolmer. Yes, they are still in there. That development is beginning construction, so over the next 6 months, year and a half, they will be put in place, or at least the backbone of that system will be.
John, can I ask, is the flowway that would accept flow from the north still in place? Because I was under the impression that was not anymore.
Yes, it is. It was moved. It's no longer in the same place as it was that I think when you first saw it. It's going to be coming through
right here.
Right here, yes. But as opposed to going through this way, I think it's coming straight through now. But those plans have been approved, and they're currently under construction.
Okay, I was under the impression that was not going to be connected to the north, but we'll look at it. Yeah.
A quick question on there's been a lot of discussion on Spring Creek and the needing for opening up or improving the flow through Spring Creek. Is there any chance that the FDOT would have money down the road to do that crossing, or something that we're not looking at local or state other than that entity? Because they did put the other crossings in when they built 75.
They have a proposal. They're in a joint partnership currently with Lee County to make a connection between Halfway Creek and the south branch of the Estero River to basically provide some relief to Halfway Creek in higher flow situations. About Spring Creek, I frankly just don't know. It's hard to project.
I think for a lot of this stuff, funding is, as it's been with a lot of your projects, same with FDOT, DOT, anybody, funding is going to be a major. You can have all the plans in the world, but if you can't pay for them to do them, it's difficult. I think with everyone. John, you say something else?
Actually, we've got a couple of funding options to study Spring Creek right now. Whether they work out or whether they don't is up to others, but the city is working on at least discussions.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's really moving. It's very preliminary. One of them could.
But no false hope there. John doesn't want to have any false hope going on for anyone. But Phil, I want to thank you and Dan for showing up, and Rick and Brenda both. Does any more of the committee here have any other questions for these guys?
I did write down a few things, some information y'all asked for, so I will try to get that to John and get it dispersed back to y'all here just as soon as possible. So,
thank you, Phil. All right, let's go down here to item 5, continuing discussion of possible mission statement and recitation of goals and objectives. There's been some communication on this from a few folks, and we would open this up for discussion. Nicole, you want to?
You. Well, in looking at this mission statement, first of all, I'm not sure that we really need a mission statement per se, but if we do, I think we need to make sure that we're staying within the boundaries of what we were tasked to do. So my recommendation, which I had shared with the group through John, was to take our mission statement directly from our implementing ordinance, to put in there what the council wanted us to do and nothing more. And you know, I caution, we really need to stick to this focus. I know Greg had recommended that we take a look at some other issues, such as the legal enforceability, kind of paying for these sorts of things. But I think we have to remember, in the moratorium itself, there was discussion about having this kind of threefold purpose of, was it balancing the interest of development, conservation, and resource protection, and they decided to take that out and really to circle our group back to the language within our implementing ordinance. So I would recommend for our mission statement, we simply pull that straight from our ordinance and have it be, it's kind of lengthy, so I won't read it right now, but right from the objectives from the ordinance.
No, I think we don't really either need one, or we can just go by the resolution or the ordinance, either one. But I would just say to the committee that if we ignore cost or ignore future land use, we're not going to come up with much of an answer, because, and I'll read from the minutes that we just approved unanimously from Martha Simons, which spoke last meeting, that she says to get to the bottom of the reason for the studies to determine what kind of land uses can be in the city's DRGR area. She hopes they will address the infrastructure and Spring Creek issues as well. Now, the other thing that we have is the proposal that Nicole had proffered last time, which basically has item 7, apply the desired potential future land use conditions in the model. I mean, so, and I think all that's good stuff. I think we just, and I agree with, let's just go by what they said, but we can't ignore economic feasibility or future land use, or we're really not going to help the city at all.
This is Tori Poland. I agree, and I think that where we've gotten into so many difficulties with this whole issue in the past 20 years is finding feasible ways of planning that we can actually afford, find a way to afford it. And if we are going to plan flowways and filter marshes, which are obviously, you know, something we really want to have, one of the questions I think that a lot of people that are living within the DRG are wondering, is this going to turn into another land acquisition? Do we have the funding for land acquisition, or the desire to do it? Or, you know, we've got some road work to do out there. We've got possibility of the building of the school. And I think otherwise it can become very much just a discussion without really coming to any resolutions. So I think those things, because the word development, is it going to develop as a agricultural, or is it going to develop as a single family homes, like we were saying, 1 per 10 acre as it is permitted for now? It doesn't necessarily mean development, as I interpret it, as necessarily meaning a major development.
Okay. I agree with Nicole from this point of view. I think that we should stick to what we were asked to do for at least the next 4 to 5 months till we get our sea legs. I also agree with what Dennis has said, and I believe the chairman and Tori, that ultimately you may have to look at different land uses, because one of the things I want to see come out of this is that if you're going to do anything in the DRGR, and actually I believe we should apply this beyond just the DRGR. I, for one, believe that in Bonita Springs, because of the topography, the sheet flow, I-75, and a host of other reasons, that the standard stormwater management design criteria that we use needs to be bucked up a bit. And the only way you're going to be able to figure out how much you have to buck it up is in this modeling, is make different assumptions on intensity of use, land use, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe it'll come. I think that if we could just set it aside for maybe like 3 or 4 meetings and get underway, then I think we're going to end up doing what you're wanting to do anyway. I mean, that's my thought.
And I agree with Fred, just to clarify, and he said it much more eloquently than I did, but I think one of the problems in some of these path planning processes is that we didn't really look at getting the water right first. We need to have all of that in place and a good understanding of that before we start to make these land use assumptions. So that does need to be on the back burner till we do all of the water portion.
Okay, so is that a, and if I'm wrong, is that a motion that we're not going to do a mission statement? Is there a motion that we adopt the ordinance as a mission statement? Is there?
I would propose we don't pursue this discussion at least for 4 months. And then at that point, I think we'll have a better knowledge if we were going to try and expand the mission or the goals or objectives. I think we'll be able to do a better job of it.
Okay,
And
do I
and
read
we
that
can
as
do
a
it
motion at this time not to have a mission statement?
to change the mission statement from what the majority of city council gave us.
But
for
we don't
4
have a
months.
mission statement yet.
Whatever
This
you
group
call
did-
they gave us, that's what I'm saying.
That was
Yeah, I'd make a motion that we adopt as our mission statement the objectives identified in our implementing ordinance.
awesome. Okay, motion made by Nicole, second made by Fred. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 6, continuing discussion regarding what resources may be needed to assist in accomplishing these goals. There are, we got some maps handed out today, a bunch of stuff. John, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just tell you what my approach has been to this point, and obviously I'm here to take direction from the group, but based on the conversation that you had at the last meeting, and I think, again, you'll find that my practice is at the end of this meeting, I'm going to try to go through what I heard, what you expect from me, but we did hear talk about trying to get some maps that showed flowways, what the current situation is. So you've got 3 maps that we prepared for you, and I think it's zoning, future land use, and the flowways as best we could. Obviously, there are lots of different versions of this kind of documentation that show up in the various studies. I did not want to, because I didn't hear it, frankly, the direction from the group, but I didn't want to reproduce all of the studies ever done for everyone. That might be helpful for some people, it might not be.
It would fill this room up.
Yeah,
when you made,
I
when you made
understand.
15 copies of it, it would.
But obviously, as you go along, they are available, pieces of them can be extracted, and we'll take direction from the group at that point. There's one other bit of housekeeping that I think is probably appropriate to get out at this point, and that is that, again, we try to get the packets out to you about a week before your next meeting. Obviously, everybody's got other things to do, and I understand that. Water Management District, perfect example. They had a lot on their plate this week and could only get the PowerPoint done at the last minute. So I would ask the group, though, that if you can, to get me your material beforehand. If you don't, I can't include it in the packet. I will still try to get it out to folks, and I think you've seen that I copied some stuff from, I think it was Nicole sent me some information. I think Fred sent me some information after the packets went out, and we'll try to continue to do that. But of course, I can't make that guarantee, and it also puts the other members under more pressure, because if you get it Monday morning for a Monday afternoon meeting, it's not quite as helpful as getting it with the packet. So again, we'll try to get you out whatever it is the group feels is important, but we are going to be operating under some pretty tight guidelines. We'll get to that later on when we talk about the future schedule, meeting schedule.
And I think under this, kind of this topic, we have way down here on item number 9, we had talked about, trying to get with Kevin Irvin and get him, okay. Oh, you're going to do that then? Okay.
Well, today's information from the district and crew was very useful. I think education is such an important part of this, even though there's a ton of information out there. But I think hearing from the Public Works Department and Bonita Springs Utilities is critical, sooner than better. you know, to continue this level of information gathering.
I would recommend that the city have a web page or web link for this committee. It needs to contain, and I agree, I don't think that there should be hard copies of all of these studies, but there needs to be a place where the committee and the public can go and find the South Lee County Watershed Plan update, the Bonita Comp Plan, the Greg Rawl report, the stormwater ordinance, the stormwater master plan, and all of these maps and PowerPoints and everything. I didn't find a web page like that. Maybe
I did.
It's okay, so
Yeah,
it is there.
if you go to the Northeast Quadrant study,
Okay, it's
then
on
there
there.
are links to all of those within that. Yes?
But we're a different committee, so I think we should have our own page.
We've already met with IT and our communications people, the folks who basically run the website, about doing something along those lines. I do want to caution you, though. Staff will do its best to make sure that it's populated with the correct information and the most current information. But I got to tell you, as just a staff person trying to be your liaison, trying to be your facilitator, I do get nervous when I hear things like, it should have all of the maps and all of it, because I don't know what all of them are. So I'm going to rely on you folks to basically monitor it, tell me if we're missing something, tell me if we have something that's been superseded, and we'll take all of your input to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. But you understand where I'm coming from. That kind of thing is just a little too scary sometimes for staff.
And John, on that website issue, for example, the Lee watershed, if it was updated again in 11, that was not on that website, but the website also, I think, had a draft of, I think it was the final report of the 09 study, but I'm not sure it said it was adopted. So I think we just need to make sure we've got the adopted studies where we have adopted studies. But also, when I pulled it down, for those of you that have computers, it was 33 megabytes. If you want to print it, good luck. I mean, so, 175 pages with maps and all, that's pretty heavy stuff. So.
I was going to ask on the flowway map that we got handed out, and we don't have to have it this next week or the week after that, but to me it would be helpful to know, like when the squiggly lines go south at this one location, does that represent maybe 25% of the water that's going out of the DRGR or whatever? Right now, there's a lot of lines. I know generally, well, that means there's flow going in that direction, but if there would be any way it could be quantified. Now, that may not be possible, and so that's number one. Number two, I think if we could get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation South Florida Water Management gave us today, that would be a good thing. My only feeling on these presentations, I think we should try and limit them to where they're going to occupy about an hour plus of our meeting, because if you hit more than that, you're going to be so inundated, you're not probably going to be able to get to some of the other things.
And we were just over an hour with that one.
Yeah.
Looking at the clock there on the wall.
Yeah. All right.
Real quick, what Fred's asked for, I think is important. Some of that's in the watershed study of the cubic feet per second capacity of the pipes under 75, for example, or at Bonita Grand at the Keel Canal, the crossing there. So I think that would help just give a perspective, even though everybody might not understand the magnitude of a CFS, but it gives you the percentages what goes where, I think.
So in addition to everything that has been presented at the meetings, if the committee members email to you studies and reports that we think should be on that page, then you'll...
Well, in terms of adding it to the website or the web page, I'd probably be looking for the consensus of the group, because again, I don't want to be the arbiter of what is an accurate bit of information to put out. But what I will do, and what I think you've seen that we did in this packet, is the information that the group thinks is of value to the group, you get it to me and I'll forward it. I put that under, I think, item 8 for member items and reports. So if things that we hadn't talked about, there wasn't a consensus that we're going to have on there, still come in, obviously I would still include that in the packet, put it out to you, and the group can be the arbiters of whether or not it's of value. What we will do, what we've asked IT to do, and what we're going to hopefully be able to put up there relatively soon in terms of the web page, is starting with the quadrant study that's been referenced, because I think that's probably the most accurate, most up-to-date bulk of information that we have, and then we'll supplement that. So we'll supplement it with whatever information I'll get with Community Development, Public Works, see what they have that they think may not be there now. We'll put that in. As the group develops more information, as a consensus of the group, we'll put that in. And again, I will be looking to you guys to make sure that we haven't missed anything, overlooked, or in the example that you're talking about, maybe put up something that isn't the latest version or the most adopted version, whatever it might be.
So would you just like a consensus list from us today of some of these reports and studies so that we can start this off?
If you have already done that, but continue to do it, so if you have an inventory that you think should be, of items that should be there, and again, some of you have already done that.
Yeah, just email them to John.
Okay, and so, but you had said that then it was going to be something for discussion of whether the group feels that that's important. So do you need us to vote on a list?
No, at this point, I guess maybe saying a consensus of the group might be too formal. We have talked about certain studies. I've heard it from a variety of people, so obviously we'll make sure that we're including that, and I assume that'll come in on your inventory. What I'm talking about is if there's some independent examination, some independent study, something that somebody's come across, before that gets posted to the website, I would like a consensus of the group that it is something that's accurate, of value, and whether or not it argues a particular point is irrelevant, at least from my point of view. But before we post on the website, I'd like to know that it is something that is of value.
And just to clarify what you're saying, that information could be sent to you by email to you, and you'll count up how many people mention that. So it works fine like that. Doesn't have to be voted on here.
And if there are issues, I'll let the group know what you can say.
And just kind of moving off of that topic, one of the things that I've been thinking about since our last meeting, and it seemed like there was a lot of interest in having some sort of contract with Kevin Irwin to do some additional work for the group as kind of the liaison to pull things together. It seemed like the big issue last time was the monetary dollar value of that. So as another resource which I think could help us in getting to our goals, I did want to bring up the possibility of having that contract split up. In case people don't have their copies of it, I would just ask that the group consider Task 1 and 2, which is really collecting all of the data that is currently here, synthesizing it, and getting us what I think would be some of the good raw data for helping us to move things forward. That would be about $20,000, Task 1 and 2. Move forward with that, a recommendation to do that, and then the rest would follow later. So I just wanted to toss that out and see if there was interest from the committee. Kevin is here today to answer any questions that the committee might have, and just toss it out for consideration.
I'll make a motion supporting what Nicole was proposed.
Have a motion and a second.
Just have a motion and a second. A motion by Fred, second by Cullum. Discussion now.
Well, first, I'd like the staff to say this is, obviously, if we take something before the city for money, does the staff support it? And I think the other part of that question is, and it gets into what I was saying earlier, does it further the ultimate, say if there's a comprehensive plan amendment in a year or two or whatever, does it further that? Does it satisfy the data and analysis for a future comprehensive plan amendment? I think if not, well then it's got to be redone later, which I think is a waste of money. So I think we just had, and that's where I think the staff needs to prove out that yes, this will get us to a track that that will satisfy what we might need down the road too for the city. And I think, of course, then the other question would be, I think down the road between the modeling and the other costs, is there any competitive negotiations, consultant issues that come into play.
From our perspective as staff, there are two different issues going on here, I think, and maybe it's helpful for me to try to separate those two. Hopefully you can give me a little more guidance on whether or not I'm correct. What the group had talked about and what we already tried to schedule going forward are presentations from folks who can lend some expertise to help the group in its evaluations as it goes forward. We talked about having Kevin come in. We had some issues to work out in terms of his availability and how it lined up with the future meeting schedule, but I think we've got that worked out. We talked about BSU, we talked about Public Works, and those were just the first three, other than the Water Management District, obviously, which you had today. So from our perspective, that was the first thing we were going to try to do, was to nail in for the first or next few meetings, presentations from one or more, probably not more, if you know, because these can get pretty involved. So probably one presentation at each meeting for the next 4 meetings from those groups. Once we go through the meeting schedule and that's confirmed, then I'll get with Kevin about his availability. Let's assume, for the argument's sake, that he can't make the next meeting, then we would either substitute BSU or Public Works, depending on their availability. But the point being that we were working on trying to get presentations on current information available in front of the group. For Kevin Irwin in particular, and again, this comes from your last meeting, it was his availability to discuss what is restoration ecology and the possibilities for Bonita Springs, and then as a subset of that, to give a background on Lee County's DRGR and his involvement with that. So that was going to be the focus, unless I hear differently, of a presentation from Kevin. The issue of whether or not the group wants to then go out and hire a consultant, multiple consultants, whatever it is, to produce new work going forward is, again, up to the group. We won't take any position as staff as to whether or not it's appropriate. We would hope that you would articulate a reason that will resonate with the city council in terms of the value of it for this group and the value of it for whatever steps the city is going to be taking, potentially taking in the future.
Ms. Vance is waving her hand frantically behind you.
Well, again, I'm just trying
I
to...
know she's legal, and so it takes a different...
I have a feeling she'll be then getting into the logistics of how that would happen, depending on the type of person, the type of expertise, the dollar value.
And that's correct. I mean, John doesn't want me going into the weeds, but in a room filled with engineers, architects, planning consultants, I would be remiss in not mentioning we will have to comply with CCNA. If it is below a certain threshold, of course, that is something that can be handled. But anything that this committee desires for additional resources from outside is something that will go through John Gucciardo, and then it's up to the city manager to determine resources if it's within threshold at a certain price, or if we have to go through competitive selection.
Tori Polanitza, I think that before even thinking about spending any more money on anything at this point, we should hear from the BSU and some of the resources that we have that are people that are willing to talk to us without any further studies and charges at this point. Because this is only the second meeting. We haven't exhausted those yet. Some of those things may be covered by some of the studies that they're actually doing professionally in any case. So.
Let me make a couple comments. Number one, we've only got a year unless we want to be in a position that we're asked City Council to extend the moratorium. We've already used up a little more, somewhere close to a month of that precious 12 months. If we were to say we want to do this first step that Nicole has proposed, my guess is whoever it is that we're going to work with is not going to be working for probably at least 6 to 8 weeks from today, and it could be 10 weeks. So there's another couple months of this valuable thing called time. The other thing is that if all these people that we're being asked to talk to and rely on had done all this work, we probably wouldn't need to do this, and I think we do, and I think that the statutes provide for if a selection for professional services is below a certain dollar amount, you can almost do what you want to do. And I think that in order to get the kind of information that Dennis rightfully wants, we're going to have to get some of this stuff done. We're going to have to find out what kind of proposed local increased design criteria we have to put into that pollution load, into stormwater management. And time is of the essence, because when we got to a certain point, it's going to take Audrey and the staff a certain amount of time, probably 60 to 90 days, to turn the crank and do all the proposed changing, and then you got to go through the public hearing process and all this. So we don't really have a year if we're going to end up with ordinances that are going to be passed, or at least considered to be passed, within that 12 months. So that's my comment.
I'd have real quick, because I have the utmost respect for Kevin Irwin, and I've worked with him known him for over 25 years. So, and he was here. He's still here. So I don't have any problem with that issue. I think the thing is, I'd like to have if we're going to recommend hiring, I'd like to. I mean, I'm not used to having the consultant. I hired a lot of consultants. I've never had one write their own scope before, and so I'd kind of like to have some interaction to make sure that it is what this committee or this group would like. I know, Nicole, you've had some interaction on it, but I have questions on, okay, well, if we do this, then what happens? And, you know, I have some questions, and I'd like to have some interaction before we hire somebody.
And that's what I thought that by having him do a presentation would do.
Well,
to have him on it, you know, because I've never worked with him, and so, you know, I don't know, and like Dennis says, you know, he wrote his own scope of services here. We had zero input on this, none. I mean, it was brought at our very first get acquainted meeting. Let's hire somebody right away. If we're going to hire somebody to do all this, the city council can hire them, and they can do the presentation to them, and they can make their decision, and they don't need us. Granted, some of these facts, you need a trained professional to give them to you. Dennis or Fred had brought up, you know, we need to get this loading and that kind of thing. This gentleman's not a hydrologist. He's not a geologist, as we talked about. You asked about the land, the different soils out there. He's not a geologist. We need to have input on this before we do it. And we wanted to have him. I hope they've got scheduled to have Kevin do the presentation for us. But it may be getting the cart ahead of the horse, so to speak. You know, that's just my feeling and opinion, but because we're asking for a lot of stuff that he's not the expert on, that there are other people that are the expert on these other issues. So he may be the exact person to pull it all together. I don't know that because I've never heard from him. So, and I think I'm owed that before I make a decision on hiring someone, that at least they've bought me dinner first.
Well, let's not have buying dinner, since that might have a gift law issue. But I do want to remind you guys that I'm looking at your resolution, and as Nicole mentioned earlier, you do want to stick as close to that resolution that City Council adopted. And item E, it does say City Council will authorize City Manager to create a fund for any necessary expenditures by the task force in carrying out their duties, including retaining any special consultants deemed necessary by the task force. The city manager shall receive council's authorization to appropriate and expend funds after presentation of estimates to receive such services, and funds will not be expended prior to such authorization. So make sure everybody's very clear. Nobody's on anybody's nickel until city council gives the city manager that authorization. And then in the event that the task force needs assistance professionally, any professional will be retained by the city pursuant to Florida Statutes 287-055. And yes, Mr. Forbes is correct that under certain circumstances, a planning and feasibility study, I believe, is under threshold 1 or threshold 2. Engineers, help me on that, which I believe is $35,000. But again, that depends on whether it's a feasibility study and whether there's other factors involved. I mean, I'd have to look at everything to make sure the numbers crunched correctly. If you did go without going through selection, and if you did need selection, that we actually follow the process by statute.
And I think Kevin is here if we have questions for him specifically today. I see his presentation on the Lee, DRGR, and those sorts of things as something in addition to this, because you're right, we're going to need Roger Kopp here presenting and giving his input, probably Eric Livingston coming down and talking about stormwater. So we're going to need all of these experts, but we really also need someone to help pull it all together for us.
That was our job. I thought that was our job.
Well,
Kinda
we're not,
what
but we're not the
we're
experts
charged
on
with
that.
doing. But we're the ones to bring together the information. The information comes to us. We determine what priority or importance it is, and that's when we go to the city council. That's what we're charged with doing.
Right, if you need additional professional assistance, other than, hopefully not legal, but, you know, we will follow the statute, but, yes.
Thank you.
Number one, I believe that it's more than possible that if we pass this motion, that this group can sit and we can talk to Kevin and we can go back and forth and probably fine tune the words, and if we have to amend the resolution at the next meeting or the scope of work. But I feel if we're going to get this thing done and get things to where the city's going to be able to act on it, we need to get on our horse, and I think it'll be a good first step. But as Nicole said, you're going to end up bringing in other consultants and all that. If city council doesn't want us to do it, they're not bashful in saying no.
Well, and maybe I've taken a step too far, but what if there's another consultant out there that wants to do this work? Okay, do we give them a fair opportunity or no? What if there's someone else that wants to come and make it, hey, you know what, I'll gather the information for half the price, or, you know, I was a bit taken aback when we had a scope of services with a price at our get acquainted meeting, and I thought that was pretty brassy. And for someone who's never addressed this group, we've never seen them as a group, it doesn't pass the smell test. And that's just being honest with you. The only way I can be. So, you know, right now to say, let's hire someone, let's hire this person right now for this amount of money, we can do it legally because we can cut it up into sections. Well, maybe we can or maybe we can't, because we got a whole proposal in front of us. It's not broke down into 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 or whatever. There are points that would come to, and I'd have to get legal counsel on this, that whether or not we can do that or not. I want this thing to go forward fast, like Fred does. I mean, if we could have this done by Thanksgiving, I'd be the happiest camper around here. But I just don't feel comfortable with doing it with the stuff that I've set through, and I know Fred has too, but with the Chapter 288 and the legal things that we have to do in order to do business, I'm uncomfortable as heck with this. And I'll do a lot for you, but I won't jeopardize, one, my personal integrity or the opportunity to stand in front of a judge. So, this scares me right now. And if it doesn't, you haven't had him, Charlie, writing about you in the newspaper much. So we have a motion on the floor and we have a second. Okay? Yep. Fred, you made the motion?
Well, I just made the motion that we go ahead and accept what Nicole had proposed on this, to hire Kevin Irwin on this reduced number of tasks to get the thing started. And that was the motion.
Can I clarify what you said, Fred, too?
Yes.
You said after we make the motion, we can talk with Kevin about the scope and modify. What were you saying there?
I believe you could, yes.
Why
I've
wouldn't we
do-
talk
I've
with
done
him
a lot of-
before?
I've
I'd rather
done-
talk with him before and make sure
I've done
that
a lot of
he's-
government procurements, and there's a lot of things you can do. There's things you can't do, and I know the lady in the blue dress back there will keep us from doing anything that we should not do.
Okay.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, well, just under the rules we operate under, can we talk to, would we be able to speak with Mr. Irwin right now under discussion here before we vote?
Sure, if that's what the
Okay.
group wants to do. You're going to run out of time, but, yeah, and it's not fair to him. He
All right, well,
deserves,
I'll go ahead and call the question.
you know, that he deserves the opportunity to make a presentation.
Yeah.
I mean, and the same as anyone else would. If there was another consultant or someone out there wanting to do some of this work, they would deserve it the same as he would. All right, we'll take a roll call vote on this.
And the motion, again, as I understand it, is to retain Kevin Irwin under tasks 1 and 2? Is that?
Yeah, yeah, that'd be
Well,
subject.
Obviously, this is just a recommendation to council.
Okay, Mr. Forbes.
Yes.
Nicole. Tori. Dennis.
No, because I'd like to talk with him first. I wouldn't be maybe against it if I could at least have to talk with him. I mean, how can you hire a consultant without talking? I don't know, but I have.
Mr. Hasty.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
And I vote no. But it passes 4-3. Anything else we need to bring up under any other resources we might need to get right now? Dave?
Thank you very much. In thinking about the topic I raised last time about what's happening inside and outside the DRGR, you know, I'm surprised turning around a corner and there's a whole new development I never knew anything about, which is sort of disturbing when we're worrying about the size of the problem. And I remember Alex Grant last week said he's got contacts in University of Florida, some grad students or something like that. I would be interested if we could support getting a few dollars to him to sort of report on a monthly basis what's new, what's happening inside, outside, the federal government's paying for, the county's paying for. So we just get refreshed. Oh, there's a new 2,000 development, you know, building up over here we didn't know anything about.
So your proposal is to hire another consultant?
Well, I don't know if it's hire or free labor or whatever, but I would just like to have information on current and projected major building projects or developments that would directly or indirectly impact water issues in the DRGR. We would have the staff to report on the size of the development, what supplier provides the water, and where does the supplier get the water, and whether the information is being supported by federal funds, state funds, county funds, or the city. You know, just describe what's going on, and just say once a month come in and give us an update, so we're not surprised by some development coming in that would throw some of our recommendations into the trash can.
So, you need to get a microphone, please.
I thought, and Alex is sitting here in the audience, yeah. I thought that the way the conversation started was that he said that this university was an expert in soils and that they could be helpful or provide some additional information on whether or not the DRGR, its ground makeup, its soil makeup, would or would not be helpful to recharging of the aquifers. You know, would it? I think that was another. But I think what you're saying is a good idea too. But I think that was part of Alex's.
I also think that in the soil scientists at University of Florida, I think would be good. I think that, but I also had, I'm going to pass it out in just a minute. I also had talked with, there's two different groups that are working on things like this that are really working on development issues. One of them is the Florida Resilient Communities Initiative, and one of them is the Program for Resource Efficient Communities, and both of them have low impact development standards. They have criteria. So I'm going to pass this around, but possibly the soils guys could work with the other. These are environmental and water-related folks that have done a lot of on-the-ground information from the university. They typically do, though, require some kind of interlocal agreement and some compensation. But I can tell you, get some really low-cost advice from these university groups. So I'm going to pass around, and I didn't mean to steal your thunder, Dave, because I think also this gal right here, Nicole, has probably more information than you could ever absorb on new communities, because they track every one of them, and including the one you're speaking of on Portrait Road. So maybe Nicole, you could help some of that. I mean, especially the one that you mentioned, because I think they monitored and stayed on top of that for a year and a half before it, was approved. So, but what I'm going to pass out just for your information, no action. One of them is the information on these two programs at University of Florida that could work with the soil scientists that might be able to bring in them. The other one is there was a low impact development webinar that I got the slides, and I'm going to share those with you, copies of the slides that some of you might have chimed into that. And then I've got some economic information that I had put together, and then also information on the proposed charter school at the Bonita Springs YMCA. So those are just information for you, and so you don't need to look at it today, or you can look at it when you want to.
All right, anything else under that?
Information on that Y charter school. The CEO, who is the entrepreneur of the Y that does all these charter schools for the Y, would be happy to come down and talk to us as well.
Oh, John, could you see about the BSU for the next meeting? Right.
Well, frankly, until just now, I thought I was going to be contacting Kevin Irwin about the presentation for the next meeting. The reason why we haven't locked him in on that schedule is, well, two reasons. One, we were still going through his schedule availability. I think he was even out of the country, if I'm not mistaken, at one point. But I think we've got his schedule now. I needed to know what your schedule was going to be, and that's why I'm looking for confirmation on the upcoming scheduled meetings. But plan one was to have Kevin come in and talk about those items that I indicated that are reflected in the minutes. I don't know if you still want that now, though. That was going to be one of my questions. If you're moving forward with a recommendation that he be hired for a scope, I don't know if that's now not needed, redundant. I'm not sure, so I want a little clarification there. Then, depending on his availability on the 18th, which is your next meeting, we'd be looking at BSU and or Public Works, depending on their availability, if that's okay with the group.
We'll let you juggle it. Okay, well, that kind of segues us then to number 7, about the timetable of future meetings, the 18th and the 3rd of March and the 17th.
Just one thing I want to point out, the next meeting will be a Tuesday, not a Monday, because Monday is a holiday, and everybody goes back to Mondays. And I figured between now and then, we can figure out the groups who wants to go after the other week. Whatever you decide to do, just gets us through the next 3 meetings.
How's everyone with those 3 dates? We good?
The only thing I need to let you all know is our fire commission meets, I believe it's on March the 17th, and they have this wonderful starting time. You need to pick up a microphone, Fred.
You got to record you.
Yeah. The fire commission has a meeting on March the 17th, and our meetings start at 5:01, not 5 o'clock. But so I just want to make sure that I can leave here at least with 30 minutes to get from here to there.
Can't do it in 1 minute?
Not really.
If we're here from 1 to 5, I've already left.
Yeah. Well, never know.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and I'm going to give you a general confirmation then that those 3 dates are good, John.
And then with that, I guess we can ask Kevin right now, since he's here, are you available on the 18th for your presentation? Sounds like a no.
Available on the 3rd.
We'll pencil you in then for the 3rd at 1 o'clock, and I'll work with either BSU or Public Works, depending on availability. Is there any particular items other than general updates that you'd like to hear from BSU? And I know Public Works pretty much is going to be focusing on the TMDLs and what other projects they have going in terms of stormwater and stormwater projects. For BSU.
And I think to tag on to what Dave has talked about, you know, if they have future requests for water, kind of where those are, because they're not building nothing without water.
And again, one of the things on my checklist to go through was hearing what Dave has to say about the need for this group to be aware of what might be on the horizon. I've heard two independent sources. Obviously, I consider our staff here an internal source. We've got community development, Public Works, who I will be gathering information from as they learn about new things. But I've heard of two other independent sources. I think Phil indicated that on their website, they have tracking of everything that's coming in for permitting within their geographic region. So obviously, I'll shoot you out a reminder of that and a link to their website. The other thing I've heard, and I hate to volunteer members, but I've heard that Nicole can be a great source of information on what might be on the horizon. So again, without adding to your burden, obviously if something new pops up that we're not already aware of, we'll be relying on you to keep your radar up. Does that sound like us?
Yeah, that's great. I just don't want us to be surprised. If I may I go on a tangent for a second, please?
Sure.
Carol and I were vacationing last week out in San Diego. Lovely town, great people, but it was like City of Brown. No rain. The hillsides are brown. They're ready to fire hazards. The median strips on the highway are brown. People are no longer getting rid of their lawns, they're switching to rocks and other things because it's too expensive to water them.
You should see the wineries in Napa Valley right now.
Yeah, we did that. They were brown too. They look very sparse. And our friends are also, this is not silly, but they're not alternating days taking showers now because of the price of the water. They're not just going in for an hour and a half for a shower with hot steam and all this sort of stuff. They're cutting it back. They're even saving tap water, runoff water, making gray water so they can water whatever they do have for plants. So the BSU with the utilities, how big is the reservoir? How much more can we tap? Where are we near the boundary of no return? I mean, there's going to be some point where you just can't keep up with supply. So I'm very interested to hear talk about that. Thank you.
I'm very interested to hear about the water treatment, the septics, the potential septics, what plan they have if they do permit a school out there on the school property. I know that they have the piping coming to the corner of Terry Street and Bonita Grande, but those future plans and for future impact on that area and the present septic situation is a problem.
One thing that, of course, as you heard today, Bonita Springs is going to be increasingly adding to their water supply from the lower Hawthorne, which, yes, is a more expensive treatment. But that's the case in all of Florida, too. And even in Lee County, which does get a portion of their water from surface water aquifer, ultimately, their 30-year plan is going to be 100% from, my understanding is 100% from the brackish aquifer. So it's pretty well happening throughout the state, and probably rightfully so, even though it will be more expensive water. We're never going to have the kind of expense you probably have where you only get 7 inches of rain a year and we get 55 either. So I mean, it's just not apples and apples from that perspective of what we get from the sky. But
and that happened also with people back when they were tapping into the sandstone aquifer. The quality of water was so terrible; it cost you so much to treat it. It was a shallow rock for the sandstone was easy to get into, but it didn't make sense. It just didn't make sense for to use that just because it was low quality. But anyway, I digress. We'll move on here. Okay, any member items or reports? I think we went through all that pretty good. Staff updates, John, we've hit part of that, but
I think the only thing we didn't touch on was the field trip. Audrey and I are still working together about putting together a kind of a checklist of items that we have to address if the group is going to go as a group or if the group is going to go individually. We have to figure out what the logistics make most sense to do. And the idea would be to bring the group out to actually tour the lands in question. And obviously, the issue that Audrey is most concerned about is making it open to the public, available to the public in the best way possible, but at the same time, make it be an efficient trip for the group. So we're still working through that. I also heard here, and I'd like to confirm, that the thought was that this trip, once we do get the logistics worked out, would not be on one of the meeting dates, that it would be above and beyond. So if that's the case, once we get the logistics worked out, I'll shoot out another email to all of you with some proposed dates, and we'll see what works for the group, if that's okay.
Just one comment. If we could have something with everyone there, I think that would be far superior, even if it has to be each person has to drive their own personal car, and any member of the public that wants to come along. I know it's, but that would be the only way to make, if that's the only way to make sure that there's no communication outside of the sunshine. We need to have it as a group.
Exactly the kind of thing we're trying to balance, is what's going to be effective and yet legal and
I know, carbon footprint, I'm getting.
Nicole, I don't know if you were on, there was a bus trip that went on the Lee County DRGR committee, and I think the committee members were all there, but everybody was invited, including the press, and it was noticed, but it was on a Lee Tran bus, I think, and several stops along the way.
Yeah,
and
that would be great
like
too.
that.
Nicole's doing these things. Could she also put a little presentation together on that water source park down in the Naples area? You know, we talked about? You don't have anything? Oh, okay.
Freedom Park, I believe, is what Fred is talking about. I will check with Collier County to see what information they have and see what I can get on that.
But, and I'm assuming that's just to see what that park is, because that water doesn't flow back north. I mean, we're trying to stay focused in here on our area, and this thing can grow and grow and grow, and with our limited time, we got to remember what we're looking at. And that water doesn't come back north. I mean, we can all on our own go down and see Freedom Park. But
What that park's all about is where it takes water, stormwater runoff and all that, and does wonderful things and reduces the pollution load. I'm not proposing to go there, but a light bulb went on in my head. John, the company you work for is the company that designed that park. Maybe you could get some information that we could just share with the committee through your company.
yeah, David.
I would hope with the site visits, we could take a bus and have one tour director, so we can sort of ask questions of the tour director about what's this and what's that, and we could all gain for this information at the same time. And or can we bring other people, like from the LPA or elsewhere, that fill the bus up if we need to have more people attending?
If you, for the record, Audrey Vance, I just want to point out, if you'll give me the time to just properly research this, because the last time that we've had an inspection, there's been case law on inspection trips. And so I know Lee County in the past has done stuff. We've done stuff. I can tell you with elected officials, the rules have definitely changed. With advisory board members, it's slightly changed. I just want to make sure all nuances are looked at based on the law.
Yeah, and right now, all John's looking for is that, yes, move ahead, let's get this, and he'll get back with us with the dates, and you guys will have the logistics work out by then.
Right. Thank you.
Awesome. Anything else, John?
For your next agenda. For your next agenda, I've got, obviously, we need to do minutes each time. We'll have a presentation either by BSU or Public Works, depending on their availability. I'm going to change the public comment, if I understood correctly, so that it will be public comment on action items. And do you want that per item, or do you want that in the beginning, or is there a public comment in the beginning or end? I'm not quite following what you want to do.
Anybody want to?
The way I understood it
I want to do it to where we're legal,
Yeah,
for one.
What made sense to me when we first proposed this earlier was public comment in the beginning, and then in addition to that, yes, on anything, and then in addition to that, if there's an action item, public comment on that action item, which may have been educated by our discourse on it through the meeting, right?
Or disgruntled, whichever the case may be.
Whichever, yeah.
The question is what, and we said, well, what's the exceptions? Is it minor items that, is it every item? And I'm not sure how you define that. I'm not
Action
sure.
item, I'm not sure either, but
I have a question.
I'm not sure what action item means, but it made sense.
Would that mean that,
to
for
me.
example, when we were discussing the Kevin Irwin situation, that we would accept public input on something like that before voting? Is that what we're talking about? What if there's a busload? I mean, I'm just being practical.
You are, and I'm trying to keep this as a working group, and a small working group is,
I think we should keep it more informal than that, but then again, I'd rather leave it up to the chairman's judgment, if it's something that we, rather than just making a hard and fast rule.
that's fine by me too. I don't care. I'll do whatever the group wants to do and be. But if it's something we know that we're going to vote on, I would like for you to have it put on there as an action group so that when it's advertised, everybody knows we're going to vote on it. If we know, and a lot of times we will say, okay, we've got this thing brought together. We're going to vote on advising the city council to go this direction, and it would be put on there. At our next meeting, we're going to do that.
Understood. When we have action items that are going to be voted on, as opposed to just discussed, we will identify that in the agenda, and at the chair's discretion, am I hearing, we will have the right to have people give comments. My only two provisos are that there are going to be times when you don't have an item listed as an action item, like today.
Then you have to take the responsibility of saying, hey, you know what, we need to take public comment on this.
And the second thing is, and this is purely clerical, I guess, but for example, today it says public comment on agenda items. Am I also hearing that I will take off the on agenda items part on that, and it's just public comment open?
Yeah, because
Okay,
I mean,
good.
the public can speak on.
Well, again,
I would hope they would keep it to our agenda and not start talking about parks and recreation or start talking
there are
about
different ways to handle
law
that, but
enforcement or
the
something.
public has the right to speak, and that's what we're trying to make sure we have
I
here.
think it should say on agenda items, because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, hey, would you make we need better pest, wild animal control or whatever.
You have the right to restrict anything where it's not relevant to the committee.
So my last question then is, other than public comment, minutes, a presentation, are there any other items specifically that you want listed for the next agenda?
Being an old government bureaucrat, it would be useful, I think, from a philosophical viewpoint, to sort of have a topic the way ahead. Where do we see us going? Are we looking in the same direction, or are we looking diametrically opposite? If talking about when things should be done by, who should be doing what? What are we going to? We're going to be providing the alternatives, or are we going to be asking staff to provide alternatives? But I think philosophically, as chairman, we should sort of talk about that for 10 or 15 minutes, and to eventually hone into, what we should be doing, when it should be done, and how.
I like that idea because Fred had brought up too that what's the different steps, and Paul says, well, I'd like to be done by Thanksgiving. What are the steps that we need to do to get from A to B and to C, whatever. Yeah. So maybe that discussion of the schedule of our work, or consultant work as well.
My biggest fear is that this grows into like a lot of these documents are actually a living, breathing thing that's going to change from time to time, and the city council is going to say, we need to continue this committee. We want to get done, get out of here, cut the cord, and get the work done that we need to do. Awesome. All right, item 10 is our next meeting date is Tuesday, February the 18th at 1 o'clock in these chambers. Item 11 is adjournment. Thank you all so much for your time.
I don't know, because I don't have a copy. No effing clue. Welcome to this is all I got.
Yeah, well, the thing was, that was a information
This is that, this happens to be.
You've used a couple other, I've used FGCU and University of Cutter, so I've looked at a few things, but,
I'll send something to John.
yeah, they have the federal research. Hey, did you give one to John? My office.
Can you talk to her, though? I think she likes freedom.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, Robert, give me a call.